Okay, we're live. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. We are rejoined today with Aidan Jonah, the editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. So it's another one of our All Things Canada edition. But the reason why we're having this special episode, which is being live streamed, is we're hoping that we're hoping I'm hoping to help Aidan with a fundraising drive he's doing for the Canada Files, and I'm going to post the link to where people can donate to that.
Oh, link, of course. Sorry, it would be donor box. It would be.
Yes, exactly. And I have just posted it, and hopefully people can see it. If they don't see it, don't worry. I will make sure that it's definitely going to appear in the show notes.
Yuri, is there anybody in the chat yet? Just because we might because I'm not seeing the chat numbers. So, is there like anyone watching at this moment?
There doesn't seem to be anybody watching at the moment, but I did just post the I did just post.
Okay, never mind. We're all good then. Okay, all right, just go on. I was just wondering. That's all.
No worries. And then just before we do talk to Aidan, I'm going to we're gonna play we're gonna do a little promo. We're gonna show a promo video on why people should be donating generously to the Canada Files. So, one moment. Yeah. One second. Yep. Okay, and Aidan, you can see my screen, right?
Let me check right now. Yes, I can.
Okay, good. And hopefully the audience can see it too. One moment. Okay. All right. Can you see this right now?
Yes. In fact, I can.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So here goes.
This country is a media desert, especially when it comes to the topic of Canadian imperialism. There are very few outlets or resources for anyone critiquing Canada's foreign policy.
If there is anything that the Canadian media lacks, it is an anti-imperialist perspective, which the Canada Files provides.
Few Canadian media are willing to challenge Canadian foreign policy and progressive forces that sometimes back it. The Canada Files is.
Since 2019, Canada Files has established a clear track record of exposing the true nature of Canadian think tanks and their attempts to shape public opinion, Canada's various imperial projects, and the political elites from all sides of the spectrum who provide cover for them.
Uyghurs, Hong Kong, Tibet, Russia, the Navalny controversy, the Iranian government, Belarus. In Canada, only the Canada Files, actually, aside from those that are connected to a political party or organization, only Canada Files as an independent outlet has dealt and is dealing with all of those issues based on very serious documented evidence.
It's been a pleasure to work with Aidan to develop the Canada Files focus on Canadian imperialism through extensive coverage of Canada's destructive foreign policy from Palestine to Latin America, the role of the Canadian government in the ongoing Cold War against China, as well as the failures of traditional progressives and social democratic forces in countering said policies.
It is time for the Canada Files to take the next steps to move things forward. And for that, we need your financial support. There are 3 key incentives that we are providing. I will go through one. That is, at $7,500 a month, the Canada Files will launch a weekly interview show focusing on topics impacted by Canadian foreign policy. This is the kind of unique journalism that we need more of in this country. It needs to be backed for this to become possible. So please consider donating to the Canada Files on a monthly basis.
Arnold August.
Okay, one moment. One moment. Just trying to stop share screen. Yeah. Okay, so the people there, they couldn't have pitched it. Well, I mean, I couldn't have pitched it better myself. So white people should be donating to the Canada Files. And as you saw in that video, our frequent returning our frequent guest Eve Engler was on there, as well as Arnold August, who I recently interviewed on an All Things Cuba special. So Aidan, before Aidan, before yeah, let's jump right away into to the reason why you're here, because not only are we hoping that people donate generously to the Canada File so that you can expand so that you can expand it and do more wonderful muckraking journalism, anti-imperialism journalism. Let's talk about your latest investigative piece for the Canada Files and its importance for people, and its importance for people who should be anti-imperial and those who have imperial blind spots. So the title of your article was Exclusive: How the NED, Open Society Foundations, and NATO collectively fund institutions driving development of Canadian political thought. So explain the article, explain what you uncovered and why, and again, why people should be concerned, especially, those who are, go. Take it from there.
So I'd wanna actually jump to an article that's very much on a similar topic to just explain a little bit more of the context for why people should be concerned about it, right? I think we might have talked about this last time, but I'm not 100% sure if we did. There was this article I did. Essentially, here's the deal, right? To give you some of the general geopolitical context, of course, around 2015, 2016, you have Justin Trudeau's Liberal government coming into power. Then by 2017, 2018, you have the Chrystia Freeland wing of the Liberal Party taking dominant control of Canada's foreign policy, especially with Freeland literally becoming Minister of Foreign Affairs, with the previous minister, who was at least on non-disastrous terms with Russia and China, was
actually
booted out.
Can you say that again? Can you say that again?
Right. So the Minister of Foreign Affairs, previous to Freeland, was actually on decent terms with Canada and Russia. So.
Okay.
Right. And so point being, right, is of course Freeland comes into office, and then you have the case where Meng Wanzhou, Huawei CFO, she ends up getting arrested based on illegal sanctions, and the whole justification, of course, is Canada has a treaty with America saying that they will detain and then essentially deport those who have committed crimes in another country. They have one of those agreements with America, and so that agreement was kind of was the justification for Canada being the only one out of 33 countries that America had requested to arrest Meng Wanzhou in their when they had landed down in their country. Canada was the only one to do that. This was December 1st, 2018. Relations began to deteriorate there. I mentioned this date because there's a funny timing that certainly is nothing proof, but if you take a look at this International Human Rights Subcommittee, there's an important thing to note there. It started in October 2018, midway through October 2018. So the timing, it feels like you start to have some questions here, right? And so what ends up happening is that this subcommittee doesn't really end up meeting for another year or two. But just to give you an idea of how this would start to go, you had basically Human Rights Watch, Canada's Human Rights Watch director, basically, and I think we all know Human Rights Watch and their deal. As you've said, they're really up there with, as you refer to them as, Shamnesty International.
Exactly. And I'll jokingly call Human Rights Watch Human Rights Fraud, and then in brackets Watch. But yeah.
No, not a bad one. Not a bad one. Another witness that day was actually Adrian Zenz. Just a regular fellow in China studies, just a regular guy who is a massive anti-Semite, and
yes.
I don't even want to say some of the stuff he's said. It's absolutely gross, disturbing things.
But yes, our go-to expert on the Uyghur genocide narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, of course, I think people know enough about Adrian Zenz at this point, but if not, look, go check the Gray Zone. That's who exposed him first, and I'm always going to give him proper credit for that. But the reason why I mention this, right, is then you have this really interesting group, and not interesting in a great way, right? You have this Uyghur rights advocacy project. The name's a little confusing. Sometimes I get confused, but it's a Uyghur rights advocacy project. Now, this group gets founded around that 2019 period. And the reason why it's relevant, right, is because guess what? It's openly funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. America's arm, or basically the CIA's cutout, for quote-unquote above-board regime change. And as a result of this, right, it immediately becomes a group of concern. And this group's leader is Mehmet Toti. And so the reason why I mention this, right, is because then you have the founding, right, of a rather interesting group. And this group is the Parliamentary Uyghur Friendship Group, which was founded in February of 2020. Why this is important is because this was in between the first and second sittings of this subcommittee. Subcommittee starts again July 20th, 2020. And Toti testifies on the 28th. Why does this matter? Because 5 out of the 8 MPs in that International Human Rights Subcommittee were members of the same Parliamentary Uyghur Friendship Group that Mehmet Toti was. Now, this should be, quite frankly, a national scandal. This should be a national scandal, quite frankly, because you have one of the most sensitive geopolitical issues in an alleged genocide, and 5 out of your 8 MPs that are on this committee are in the same friendship group as your star witness and one of the driving people in this campaign. And of course, surprise, surprise, as you get with social imperialists or so-called social democrats, you had NDP MP Heather McPherson actually on that subcommittee as well. And McPherson's someone who really is an imperialist, and eventually she'll get her own coverage on the Canada Files if people along with there have time, because
NDP, right?
She's very bad. I know Eve has done a little writing on her a couple times because he keeps on yelling for war with Russia. It's really bad. But point being, right, you have this whole massive scandal, and the craziest thing about this Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, I kid you not, it just said it on the website. This is the laughable state of Canadian investigative journalism. I literally looked at the site for like 5 minutes and then went, that has to be a joke. And I looked at it again and I was like, nope, these people really just believe it. These people really are actually just taking NED money. They really are.
Yeah, the National Endowment of Democracy. Yeah,
National Endowment for Democracy, right? And this is the interesting thing, and part of the reason why eventually I after a couple hours, I grew to understand it. I remember that Max Blumenthal did a whole mini documentary on the NED at this conference, and you have all these grantees. They're always so grateful to the NED, and I remember watching it, and Blumenthal asked a few questions to some of these grantees, right? And they all openly thanked American citizens for helping their campaigns and cheered them on and were really grateful. They had no sense that this was bad stuff, that they were genuinely believed in their nutcase causes. And so, I mean, that's kind of part of the logic, I think, that makes these people, comfortable, right, to actually talk about these things. But of course, the reason why I mention this, it's just nuts to me that this happens. I mean, the good news at least was that I believe now they go by Q Anthony, but their Twitter at is Andre Domis. Was kind enough to come on, and as well as our sadly passed comrade Omar Latif were both willing to come on the day of the vote, and we were able. The Can Files was the only the only outlet willing to go and cover this vote, because I'm not going to jump too far to there, right? Because I want to talk about it a little bit more before the context. But I will say a vote did eventually happen, and I think we all know the results. But the reason why I mentioned this, right, is because in terms of this isn't the end of the story, right? This is far from the end of the story. You then had the Uyghur Human Rights Project, which is an affiliate of the US-backed World Uyghur Congress, and they received $1.28 million in grants from the National Endowment for Democracy from 2016 to 2019 alone. So another example of NED interference in Canadian politics. You have the East Turkestan government in exile. You have Campaign for Uyghurs. You have ASPI, which is funded by all the weapons contractors, all the weapons contracts, and think tankers. Basically, I honestly could not include all of the just genuine nutcase people that actually went along and testified in this. It was really nuts. There's the British equivalent of the NED, if I remember correctly. I'm pulling up some of my old notes to try to see if I actually touched on this, because I had to cut it out. But I know there's like the British equivalent of the NED testifying as well. You had all these really, really incredibly problematic figures, right, testifying, and this nobody batted a bloody eye. Like the social democratic media sphere just pretended this committee stuff didn't even exist. The Canada Files had coverage actually of the committee around late October of 2020. In hindsight, I didn't realize what was coming, but there actually was coverage because people had reached out and wanted to write, and I was happy to have them cover it because it concerned me. But I mean, how are you supposed to grasp that these are the kind of interests at play? I mean, it's one of those things where until you actually see it, you investigate it, you look through it. I mean, it's stunning to believe. It's certainly one of those things when once you see it, you don't go back, absolutely at all. And it really just does bring a real feeling of anger for me. And of course, the truth is this, right? You also have Canada's AFL-CIO as one of these testifying organizations.
Wait. You mean Canada's AFL-CIO, you mean?
Technically. I mean, I prefer Blumenthal's term.
Okay, just...
for technical purposes, yes.
Just in case people don't know, just in case people don't know, the AFL-CIO is a very big union in not just the U.S. but North America. And actually, what are some of the what exactly are they involved in, the AFL-CIO, Aidan, in case people don't know them?
Well, they've had a history of severe, really strong anti-communism. I mean, they booted out tons of communist unions right at the start of the Cold War. I know they played a pretty crucial role through like their international arm.
They're just a broad, but they're just a broad trade union organization, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But they've been used as really an anti-communist arm of the American state. I mean, there's obviously, I think we all know about the Solidarity Center and that its anti-communist roots and how it was used to help defeat the government, the Eastern Bloc government in Poland. So that's why I mentioned, and why Blumenthal had mentioned AFL-CIO, and I think that's for good reason. But the reason why I mentioned CLC is just because they actually testified as well. And they, what one of their most frustrating false claims is, they claim that China refused to allow observers to enter Xinjiang, when actually it offered the UN, EU, numerous Muslim countries, and the U.S. government the opportunity to enter and observe conditions in Xinjiang. You have dozens of Muslim countries and countries in Africa basically taking up this offer. it's only the quite frankly America and the West that have the most to gain from pushing this genocide narrative that refuse to go. And quite frankly, I think that the CLC is something that's become such a sad sack, really. I mean, I believe it was Yusuf Hassan. I believe it was Yusuf Hassan, right? No, I think it was Hassan Yusuf, the former head of the CLC in Canada. He literally went and became a senator right away after he left.
Yes, that's Canada's House of Lords, the unelected Senate. Yeah,
basically, yes. Yep, Senator Hassan Yusuf. There's nothing more blatant than literally going to the friggin' Senate right after you lead a labor organization. And so, yeah, at its core, right, though, what this means and what it leads to, right, is you eventually have a vote. February 22nd, that was the day the article was released. I kid you not, I worked on that for around, I believe it was 12 straight hours once I started on this, because I started this at 4, realized, holy crap, I'm on to something at like 5, and then worked till like 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, and then woke up at 9 and pulled everything I had to get it out at like 12:30. That was one of the most wild nights I've had running the Canada files. I just pulled everything I had into getting that out because I absolutely knew that there was no other option than that getting out before the vote. There had to be no excuse. Because if I did this a minute after the vote started, there would have been an excuse. And that would have been dangerous. So, yeah, I mean, I still have so much memories in that. Because in the end of the day, right, that vote passed unanimously. And so-called heroes of the left, per se, quote-unquote left, pretty much all voted for it. It was a unanimous vote in favor of declaring a purported genocide, a non-existent genocide, in fact, in the Xinjiang region of China. You had people like Matthew Green pushing this pathetic line of, oh, well, we need to push for Palestinians with the same edge and passion that we're doing with the Uyghurs. And it's like, just piss off. In all seriousness, Rania Khalek and others have talked a lot about this, about how the Syria, basically how Palestinian solidarity movement was purposely really divided over, like tactically divided over Syria, the invasion of the dirty war in Syria, and the invasion of Libya. That was a really tactical element by the imperialists in Canada, America, and across the world. And now I think, quite arguably, you're starting to see a very similar thing occur with Uyghurs. I mean, there's been 1 or 2 prominent social democratic figures. One of them I'll get to. Actually, I'll mention Matthew Green first, of course, because he was the one who pushed that line there. And then I'll get to the other one after the talk about the vote. Right. So this vote passes, and the Trudeau government and the Liberal cabinet does actually abstain from this. So the Canadian government
and it's important because we have to really get the audience to understand. It's important to know. So all of these horror stories that was at this subcommittee that you were talking about, in which this vote passed that China's committing genocide against its Uyghur population, its Muslim population. All of the testimonies came from the National Endowment, the National Endowment from Democracy. Well, and of course, and all of these Uyghur rights groups are funded by the National Endowment of Democracy or some kind of.
So many of these testimonies have repeatedly fallen apart under the latest criticism. That's the biggest thing. They've been repeatedly debunked.
Or some kind of Canadian deep state. Or some kind of Canadian deep state front. That's where all of these testimonies are coming from.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're on the money there. It certainly is a massive problem. And of course, the other person I wanted to mention is Aziza Kanji, because she is a columnist at the supposed anti-war fierce lefty media. Basically, she has been a prominent person on this Xinjiang genocide narrative train for a while, really. And I mean, it's really cynical and insidious how these pseudo-left social democratic figures use that friend. You wanted to jump in, Yuri? It looked like you did.
Yeah. Well, I actually wasn't going to mention her name. I didn't even write her name in my questions. But indeed, she testified saying that there's a genocide going on in Uyghurs, and she's made a very good point. And she's made a very good point at basically, sort of weaponizing Islamophobia and like legitimate Islamophobia, like oppression of the Palestinians, what's going on in Kashmir with India taking over the disputed territory of Kashmir, and I've seen her on the Canadian Zoom events of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, where our friends Bianca and Eve Engler are part of, and she compares, of course, what's happening in Palestine to the dispossession and oppression of indigenous people. But I was very surprised when I read that article of yours that she has basically jumped the shark on this Uyghur genocide narrative, and she even wrote or co-wrote an article in Qatari-funded Al Jazeera attacking Max Blumenthal and others who are pushing back against this narrative, which is part of which, if we want to look at the bigger picture, is part of the pivot to Asia and trying to actually, provoke a new, an actual, possible military nuclear conflict with China.
Of course. And one of the biggest scandals there, honestly, more so than testifying alone, which is terrible, is in fact that Aziza Khan, she's a big supporter of the NED-funded Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, which is openly funded by the NED. She co-wrote an op-ed with the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project Executive Director Mehmet Toti. I'll give you the title: Canada's Duty to Prevent Unfolding Uyghur Genocide. She's advocating for sanctions. She's pushing this debunked allegation of genocide, and she's co-writing an op-ed with an NED-funded organization in Canada. And so here's the one thing I'll give a point of credit, I guess. I'll give a point of credit, is the Breach hasn't published her at all yet. So maybe, just maybe, they've actually taken the lesson in the warning. Maybe, just maybe. I to be honest, I did have basically both key figures in the Breach, Drew Ojaj and Martin Lukash, whining in my direct messages, going, "Oh, why are you exposing this? This has nothing to do with us." It was just, "Oh, this isn't the way you aren't gonna have good relations or get things done if you're clashing with people like this." And it's like, you think I'm here to appease you? I'm here to do journalism.
And well,
I don't have time for that. Like, I'm here to be a serious journalist and get shit done.
And if they want to respond to the allegations you made, they are free to contact.
I can show you the direct messages. I have the direct messages. So believe me, I am more than happy to have them come and chat about this, because I have the receipts. And so I bet you they won't. And if they do, look, I'd be pleasantly surprised. So, but this is the kind of journalism that the Canada Files does. And we haven't even gotten into the most recent one. The Canada Files doesn't mess around. It's a serious institution doing serious journalism that is pissing off influential people, like people that are part of the social democratic political hierarchy in this country. And look, I have no doubt that Breach does some good journalism once in a while, right? They really remind me of The Intercept in America, right? They do some good journalism, but then they also kind of harbor these people that are very much weak links in any sort of serious anti-war movement, and eventually could cause the kind of harm. So look, if Kanji doesn't end up writing for them, I think that'll be the end of really any relation with them or disputes or whatever with them. I think that'll be the end of it, right? But if it isn't, then look, I mean, what's fair is fair. If they publish her, then look, all bets are off. So it's just one of those things where I think for me it's a dead serious issue. You're pushing. I don't think a lot of social democrats and people in the imperial core grasp what it's like, the horrible impact of sanctions, the threat towards the sovereignty of a nation, and the devastating impact of war. These people just push these imperial narratives, and they expect no consequences. They just expect to go willy-nilly and get away with this crap. And they've been able to get away with this crap for so long because there hasn't been serious investigative journalism on an institutional level. You have in America, the Gray Zone has done a great job of doing journalism that makes consequences. I mean, they basically made Adrian Zenz into a running joke, which is such an incredible achievement. You had that nutcase rich heiress. I'm not sure if you saw it, where basically she sued them, and then basically look, they won that case, and they published like a 9,000 word piece that was an utter destruction of her. It was that's the end of her being taken seriously by even the most pathetic social democratic.
Exactly. In the U.S., I sometimes find our American comrades are a bit too hard on themselves when they say that there's no left in the U.S. and so forth. There's no anti-war movement. And I say to them, guys, you're being way too hard on yourself, because you have the Gray Zone, you have Min Press News, you have Black Agenda Report. Rest in peace to the great, Glenn Ford, Consortium News, who not only, they do fantastic work exposing all these imperial forces, but they call out, the pseudo-left. They call out, the misleadership class of, the working class, Black America and so forth, and Middle Eastern Americans who are jumping the shark and are recycling all of the propaganda that the powers to be are doing that. Whereas, as you mentioned, in Canada, there's not so much of that, and you're an exception to that rule.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much an intentional thing. It's very much an intentional thing. I think, quite frankly, you have basically, quite frankly, a sad state of journalism in Canada, a really unserious state of journalism, in my opinion. And I mean, there's quite frankly, I mean, this is the thing with the Canada Files, and why this fundraising campaign is so important, is because, quite frankly, the Canada Files and myself and Daniel, we've put our heads on the line, per se. Like, we've stuck our necks out to do this kind of reporting, piss off powerful people within like the social democratic left. And unfortunately, social democrats make up a good portion of what people think of as the left, even though really they're just the left arm of capital, rather than an actual left-wing force. And that's an important distinction, right? So that's the key thing there, really. But I think the key thing, obviously, is that with the NED influence in Canada, right? I've already demonstrated one case. The recent investigation that I know you're originally trying to get to, and I'll finally get to it. With the NED, actually, they fund a second group in Canada. This NGO is called the Center for Law and Democracy. This guy is a former human rights policy analyst at the Canadian International Development Agency. That is CIDA.
Yes. And
they have a earned reputation of being an arm of the Canadian imperial state. I mean, look at what Louis Saint Laurent, one of Canada's former prime ministers, said in 1950 about Operation Colombo, which is a Commonwealth aid plan to basically, its main purpose, right, was quite literally to stop the spread of communism in Asia. That was its stated purpose. So just to give you an idea of the kind of agency, like basically the role of an aid agency in the Canadian state, it's a very much a hostile institution dressed up in nice coding, per se. And this is the thing, right? You look at CLD and you might think, oh, maybe it's only the NED, which is horrible. So you also have the Centre Canadien d'Études et de Coopération Internationale. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. It's called CECI. So this group, this
Your
NGO,
your French is good, by the way.
yeah,
Better than mine.
yeah. So basically, CECI supported anti-Aristide pro-coup groups in 2004 in Haiti with CEDA funding. Then you have this German semi-NGO that's basically the German equivalent of the NED. It's funding basically this CLD as well. You have the European Union. You have Global Affairs Canada. You have UNESCO, Open Society Foundations, which we're going to get into later.
Yeah.
And also international media support. And you want to know where international media support receives its funding? 91% of it is funding from the Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian foreign ministries and embassies.
Wow.
So that's where they're getting their money. And CLD, this Center for Law and Democracy, they've never released a publicly available annual report in their 11 years of action. And I want to actually read out this.
And they paint them and they paint themselves as an independent NGO, or
that's always the way they push themselves. It's we're some sort of independent organization. We're heroes fighting for human rights. It's like, give me a break. You're taking money from the worst governments in the institutions in the world, quite frankly. And here's the thing: when I basically asked them, are you gonna be putting out an annual report? They responded in this way. We have all our work profiled on our website. As such, and given the time it takes to prepare annual reports, we have not bothered to do this yet. Do you feel there is a specific need for an annual report? And it's like, you're an organization that's been around for 11 years. This isn't like some sort of one-man operation. Like, you have funding, a ton of funding. Clearly, if you have this many governments backing you, government agencies, these semi-independent NGOs, you have the money. They refuse to do that. I make it clear, right, that they're not transparent with the money. And they just never responded to that follow-up email. So the interesting thing, actually, is CLD's work was majorly focused on Myanmar. And if you haven't already, check out Brian Berletic's work on Myanmar. The Aung San Suu Kyi opposition is, let's just put it this way, it's not something I'll get into now, but they're not really the heroes people think they are, and they've gotten a ton of funding from the Western governments for like decades, right? And then, of course, then you have Nepal, and Nepal has been actually a focus of the CLD even before the rise of Nepali Maoists to power, actually. So there's a whole other thing. I won't get into the Nepali Maoists, but I'll just say that there was a New Brunswick education minister who was the... Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
Right. So this New Brunswick education minister, he was the former head of, I believe it was the National Democratic Institute's area, right, for Nepal. And so this guy, who's now the New Brunswick education minister for the progressive conservatives, basically he led the efforts to delay elections and block the rise of Nepali Maoists to power, right? So I gave you this example because the Western groups, basically any groups that were working in Nepal, I can bet you they're not acting in good faith, and they're very much acting to try to defeat the rise of the Maoists. So this basically their activities are very shrouded. It's not 100% clear a lot of things they do. It's just a problem. It's like their funding. It's a problematic element, right? But I just mentioned this because you have two groups alone, in two groups already in Canada, that actually, I kid you not, take money from the National Endowment for Democracy. I mean, it doesn't even stop there. I mean, USAGM, right? USAGM, which is the American propaganda arm, it actually, of course, runs Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Liberty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it actually has, I was looking into them a bit. It looks like they actually have two, I believe it's one station and one TV station, just generally two content producing sites, one in Toronto and then one all the way very close to the US border in British Columbia. So you even have USAGM operating in Canada. Like, these are the things people don't grasp that are happening. It's severely, severely problematic that, I mean, this government is allowing this to happen. And you have this batshit, this crazy paranoia, right? About Chinese and Russian influence and these evil people working to interfere with our elections. It's like the only people some of the only people that are interfering are like semi-NGOs, the bloody NED, like the American state, like other aspects that
yeah, exactly. No, exactly. I mean, we're hearing all of this stuff like we have to like TikTok needs to be under American control because the Chinese are invading our privacies and are sowing divisions within us, and the Russians with RT and through and through like RT and through Donald Trump and stuff like that, they're dividing and conquering us. When it's really like, guys, the only people that are influencing, regressive thoughts and like regressive actions are our rival oligarchs within our own borders. And as you mentioned, anyone who knows even elementary stuff about the CIA and the National Endowment of Democracy, for me, they're one and the same thing. They're the ones that are actually, influencing, meddling, whatever you want to call it, but they're the ones that are actually influencing, Canadian politics. Sort of what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, that's the thing at its core, right? And this it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there at all, right? One of the bigger things, and I'll explain why I was looking into Transparency International, because that's the group I was looking into. I started to look into, and then things went from there.
I was saying, do explain about Transparency International. I'm not too familiar with them, but
right. So it's one of these neoliberal organizations that purports to fight against corruption, and it does most of the time. But it really is just yet another example of the neoliberal state using NGOs or semi-NGOs, wiped up in good terms, just to push an agenda that pressures countries to keep as close as possible to the neoliberal desires of the economies. The reason why
would you say that Transparency International weaponizes what I call half truths? So because you mentioned because you mentioned from the beginning of the show how the NED influenced Solidarity, the trade. The trade union, the sort of anti-communist trade union organization.
I don't know if it was NED for sure. I assume it might have been, but it was AFL-CIO's International Center for sure. So
yeah, and of course, there were issues in the Eastern Bloc, just like there were issues in the USSR, just like and even now, after the end of communism, there are rival oligarchs, and there are and there are corruption, human rights abuses, bigotry that does take place in Eastern Europe. But an organization like Transparency International, would you say that they sort of weaponize these legitimate issues? And they sort of weaponize what I call half truths, to the point where it's more easy to feed the public that this country, it could be Ukraine, needs we need to overthrow Viktor Yanukovych, or Belarus, we need to be involved in Belarusian affairs and oust Alexander Lukashenko because of so forth and so forth and so forth. But really, they're acting as they're basically acting as they're doing color revolutions. They're basically acting as imperialism, right? Oh,
sorry, I think there's a technical issue on mic. While I talk about Transparency International for sure, and they really function in an interesting manner. One of the the reason why I mentioned them is just because I was looking at this this book by Sam Cooper that caught my eye. Of course, it's one of these books that basically makes the paranoid claim that Canada is being infiltrated by CCP agents, and all we need are the so glorious intelligence agencies, which are all my sources, by the way, which are all of Sam Cooper's sources, by the way, not me. Just to clarify. Basically, I kid you not, he actually just straight up says, this is from like my DEA sources, this is from my CSIS sources, this is from my RCMP sources. I kid you not.
Professional liars.
He really says this at the end, right? Only a professional journalist that straight up takes most of his stuff from our intelligence agencies, which definitely don't lie and definitely don't have horrible histories. I mean, the CSIS definitely didn't come to exist because the RCMP lied so bad they had to literally split the organization, create a new organization. I mean, that's the whole thing. There's a whole massive commission in the 70s and 80s, and they were forced to create CSIS. And so why in the bloody heck do you
wait? So CSIS, which is Canada's CIA, was formed because the RCMP, Canada's national police force, was so corrupt that they had to basically develop this secret service agency, which also is corrupt to the core.
So not so much corrupt in that it took illegal actions and basically it violated laws repeatedly. It's not corrupt technically per se, but no, it was like during the 80s that CSIS got created. So it's one of these things. It's kind of nuts, right? That this person would then go ahead and trust them like they're some sort of revelatory figure. They're quite frankly they're not. So as a result, right, have that skepticism automatically. And I didn't find this out till later, right? But I read a book of anybody saying, oh, CCP infiltrators are coming into Canada. It's like, I immediately am like, okay, what the bloody hell is this person babbling on about? It's nonsense. And so I ended up torturing myself by buying this book, read through some of it. And I was looking at this organization that actually platformed this guy's book and like was going to have them speak at their AGM. And I noticed it was Transparency International. I kind of was wondering about them. And it's rather interesting in the sense that they have a really good relationship. They have a good relationship with both open society foundations, which we should get into next because that's one of the main trenches of the article, as well as impact, which I'll discuss soon. So jumping to open society foundations because that's
okay. So just before we do that, if you are joining us now, welcome to 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. I'm Yuri. We're joined by Aidan Jonah, the editor-in-chief of the Canada Files, and we're basically giving a lot of background information to Aidan's current piece for the Canada Files called Exclusive, How the NED, which is the National Endowment of Democracy, CIA front group, open society foundations, and NATO collectively fund institutions driving development of Canadian political thoughts. And Aidan, before we do get into open society foundations, and Aidan was just explaining about Transparency International, and he was explaining about the National Endowment of Democracy, which is a CIA front group. It's a government NGO, which is an oxymoron in and of itself, which just peddles propaganda, and we're talking really serious dark propaganda, the kind of stuff like that woman who said that little girl who was saying that, like, oh, Iraqi soldiers are taking babies out of incubators, and of course that kind of atrocity propaganda or atrocity pornography got many people to jump the shark and support the U.S. Invading Iraq, the Gulf War, which led to, which just snowballs into all of the epic injustices that we see now in Iraq. And the National Endowment of Democracy, they'll get all of these defectors, all of these dissenters, all of these people from these well-funded, from these government-funded civil society organizations, and they'll say things like, "Oh, the Chinese forced me to eat ham. They're forcing they're forcing us to shave our beards. Putin, is the Antichrist incarnate," and so forth and so forth.
Yeah, no, it really is totally a deranged, really a deranged state of affairs. It's really quite something. So, getting back into the core things, right? Let's hit on open society foundations, because they're one of the. Sorry, you were going to say something?
Yeah. So we've talked about the NED, the National Endowment of Democracy, should be called the National Endowment of Plutocracy, which is basically a CIA front body masquerading as an NGO and government charity. And I've talked about on my program several times NATO. But yes, let's talk about open society foundations. That's George Soros, the American-Hungarian billionaire, who has a reputation of being progressive. Open Society is his NGO. And so, Aidan, explain his regressive influence then on Canadian affairs, European affairs, particularly Eastern Europe, and what you uncovered with what the OSF does in relation to imperial policies.
Sure thing, right. So, of course, an important note with George Soros, of course, is he's not like some sort of figure in a massive conspiracy. Just get that out of the way, of course. He's just a subcontractor for U.S. efforts to quote-unquote open countries to neoliberalism, right? It's keeping societies quote-unquote open for business in the American-dominated international system. So getting back to the history. So George Soros began to start with his quantum fund, right? He started doing this in 1984 in Hungary and other Soviet bloc countries until the collapse of the Soviet Union. So his funds were definitive contributors to the collapse of socialism in Europe. Funny enough, he also founded the short-lived China Fund from 1986 to 89, endowing it with more than $1 million USD to start. Of course, China would crack down on that fund in 1989, which was a good thing for their own sake, and they really haven't had much systemic threats to, per se, the government since.
Yeah,
I mean, tells you the rule, right? Countries that let open society and these kind of quantum fund initiatives flow tend to lose control if they don't do what the U.S. does, and countries that force them out survive to the present day. And so when China cracked down on that fund, Soros, ever since, he's been a very aggressive and vocal opponent of China. He's fiercely pushed for liberalism and liberalization of their socialist economic structure. And even though most of the socialist bloc countries in the USSR ended with the fall of it, basically they relentlessly pushed for liberalization in any country that don't subscribe to neoliberalism, right? So while the Soviet Union was in free fall, of course, Open Society Foundations established a network and offices in Albania, Baltic states, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Romania, and Slovakia. So you have a whole network of these offices and foundations and groups that are really there to forcibly work to manufacture consent for forcible liberalization. This liberalization would have been pushed through anyways, viciously with an iron fist, and that iron fist was necessary. But this Open Society Foundation played very much of a role in enabling it to go a little more smooth.
So I know for a fact that he does advocate it, but I'm just asking for the sake of asking. So did Mr. Soros basically, with his quantum fund and later Open Societies Foundation, so he basically advocated for what's now called austerity, but back then we called it economic shock therapy. That Milton Friedman reactionary market fundamentalism, what Naomi Klein calls the shock doctrine. So Soros advocated that, but he wouldn't say that he advocated that. He would say that he was advocating liberalization.
Yeah, no, it's a good clarification, and I obviously appreciate that very much. Right. So this is I won't get too much into the whole CETA connections and Transparency International, just because we don't have all the time in the world, right? But then I want to focus on this because the weird case, basically, with Open Society Foundations, have to explain a bit about the odd case of Plan Africa Canada, which eventually became Impact, to kind of understand the state of the problem, right? So you have this this organization which was started in 1986. It was a purported civil society coalition, and guess what its purpose was? To distribute funding from CETA to quote-unquote promote development in Africa. So it says it stopped funding. I mean, for all proof or whatever that we have, it did stop distributing CETA funds in the mid 1990s, right? Then by 2009, it only has around like $360,000 in funding from CETA and this place called the International Development Research Center. Then this figure comes in, Suzanne Cote Freeman, right? So she joins Transparency International Secretariat in 1998, and this is why I mentioned Transparency International, because of course Cote Freeman she ends up joining in 2010, right? So then by the time that Cote Freeman becomes vice president, this funding has doubled to 608,000. The next year, it jumps around another 80,000 as Cote Freeman becomes president of this PAC board. And then basically, by the time Trudeau gets back in power and 2016 rolls around, they're up to $1.135 million by 2016, right? So you have this really incestuous relationship with CETA. You even had Huguette Labelle, who actually was Transparency International Canada, the Canadian chapter of Transparency International. She was the president, the head of Transparency International Canada chapter as of 2012, and she was the head of CETA for 7 years, between 1993 and 1999. So. Wow. And Transparency International, by the way, took funding basically in their first annual report. It was revealed that they took funding from Open Society Institute's foundation in Hungary between 100,000 to 250,000 euros per year. The only reason why this was the first one is because Transparency International didn't release an annual report until 2003. And they were alive, guess how long? From 1993 onwards. So there's a huge problem with transparency, right? And the reason why I mentioned this then, drawing it all the way back, Plan Africa Canada becomes Impact. They rebrand, right? Next year, they've got $2.6 million from these Canadian agencies. Wow. Then that same year, right, 2017, while Cote Freeman, who's still working at this point at the Transparency International Secretariat, while she is president of Impact, which was formerly Plan Africa Canada, Impact begins secretly administering Open Society Foundation grants to Transparency International Canada, Publish What You Pay Canada, and Canadians for Tax Fairness. And so this is why I mentioned it's important that I mentioned the relationship around Transparency International. So this organization, which had Cote Freeman serving on the Impact board, like on the entirety of its rise, right? Who worked for Transparency International. Basically, then when she's heading it up, they start secretly granting around like 25,000, and then basically more than double of that the next year. So they're secretly, basically, Impact is secretly administering funds from an American billionaire. Routing it is acting as pass-through organization for Open Society to give money to Impact, to then give money to Transparency International Canada and the other two NGOs. And here's the funniest thing. I only found this by looking through Open Society annual reports. Impact never publicly acknowledged that they were acting as the point of transfer for this funding until I reached out and emailed them and asked for an explanation around this, asked basically if they had any disputes around this. They didn't. Now, of course, they claim that this is the only time they've done something like this, right? But here's the problem, and I'm not going to accuse them of doing anything else because, yeah, again, I don't want to get sued, is look, that trust is broken now, and it quite frankly should be. A Canadian NGO that was started off as basically a CETA pool of funding then goes on to secretly pass on funding from Open Society, which of course I explained why that should be such a concern. It's nuts. It's
yeah,
really
and
nuts.
Now, why do you think they would not be transparent about getting money from George Soros's charity, his charitable NGO? Because answer that question before I ask another follow up.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, I think quite frankly, it's mostly just the fact that I mean, people would be rightfully asking questions, and they wouldn't. I don't think people would be happy about this. I mean, I'll be honest. Like, this is the article the investigation that finally got basically a lot of people, a lot of content creators, podcasters, video people actually interested in having the Canada Files and myself like appear on the show, talk about this. Like, it's big. It's a big deal that there is an American, basically billionaire organization, which has such a reputation as it does, secretly funding these groups within Canada. Now, of course, these groups individually, look, I don't have proof of them doing anything nefarious or bad. I'm going to be straight up with people. That's the case, right? I haven't gotten able to look into them individually as much as I want to, simply because this was such a massive investigation that prioritization had to occur, and that was getting the overall piece out, because this is laying the groundwork for years of further investigation into this and many other issues.
Yeah, and I think, well, what would you say, hypothetically, to somebody, defending Transparency International, saying, well, what's wrong with open societies? They do some fantastic work. They're helping countries get into the EU because those countries want to become more progressive and fight against corruption and the rise of fascism and whatnot. And so what if Transparency International is getting some money from George Soros? He's a good oligarch. He's one of the good oligarchs. Bill Gates is one of the good oligarchs. Come on, Aidan. There are good apples in capitalism.
Yeah, Bill Gates is such a great apple that he was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein once in a while. No biggie. He's Jeffrey Epstein is nobody bad, of course. I mean, no shit he is, of course. Like one of the worst people in human history, right? I want to be very clear there, right? When I say not bad, that's sarcasm. And if anybody ever tries to use that against me, I will use this clip and ruthlessly give you shit for it, right? I'm just going to make that very clear because I know how people play on this game in this media sphere. But point being, right?
Yeah.
After my little warning to people, is this, right? Along with, of course, his engagement with Epstein, though Bill Gates really isn't the focus of this, with Soros, getting back onto the point after a little ad, right? Of course, I mean, he's really an anti-communist billionaire. I mean, didn't he? I'm pretty sure, he helped trigger the financial crisis, the ASEAN financial crisis during the late 1990s. I know he bet against the pound and caused like an economic crash in Britain, I'm pretty sure, in the early 1990s. Yeah. Along with, of course, the destabilization of the Soviet Union, his forcible push for neoliberalism. Look, this is not a good billionaire, right? And so, I mean, more than anything, I think my main issue is with Impact for refusing to publicly declare this. Of course, I'm no fan of Transparency International Canada taking that money. They shouldn't, and but the irony is that I think they were still more transparent than Impact was. I mean, That's the thing about it, is Impact was spectacularly key on hiding this stuff. So that's the big scandal at the end of the day, right? Is transparency has to be of utmost importance. It has to be.
Before I get to my official third question, talking about Soros, can you talk about his his influence on the Liberal Party, particularly Chrystia Freeland's?
I'm pretty sure she's had like a decent relationship with him, but look, I'm not going to lie. I don't have the most information on that front, and I don't want to speak on areas where there isn't the most. I don't have the most information. So yeah.
Okay. I'll just say that he does donate very generously to the Liberal Party, and he does have ties to Chrystia Freeland, and I know Soros also has funded many left-ish left-leaning media outlets, including PBS. I think he also funded a lot of Bill Moyers's programs. So he's a big influence in what's called progressive politics. But we know for a fact, you take issue with him for his anti-communism crusade, and he definitely has he definitely, a lot of his NGOs push for this ongoing new Cold War with Russia, even though Russia is is unfortunately an uber capitalist state, first with Yeltsin and with Putin, but Soros, I know for a fact, must be funding Navalny and a lot of the other rival oligarchs and pseudo-leftists in Russia and in Ukraine, right?
I mean, because I could certainly see it. I mean, my focus on Soros's activities were an extent to around the fall of the Soviet Union, and then more with Open Society in Canada. That was the thing with the investigation, right? It was such a big scope that there wasn't the biggest chance to go into the other aspects. But look, I have no doubt that he's quietly kind of funding a lot of these dissident groups or things around the world. I don't think there's much doubt there, right? Whether it's that or democracy promotion institutions, or look, there's a lot of ways to fund and support opposition groups. So I think there's no doubt he's doing something like that. It just might not be in the most obvious, most obvious way.
Which is what the color revolution, which is what the color revolutions are all about. Yeah. The demise of the USSR, what happened in Ukraine with the Euromaidan protests, and later the coup, which saw rival oligarchs and neo-Nazis come to power in Ukraine, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like, yet again, I don't want to make accusations I can't verify. So I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Specifically about that, yeah.
Then let's okay, well then my follow-up question is, how are these different Canadian deep state bodies, semi-NGOs was your term in your article and so forth, how are they shaping the message the public at large is receiving on, say, the crisis in Belarus, where the EU, Canada, and the US is putting sanctions on the government of Alexander Lukashenko, the ongoing civil war in Ukraine, and the recent US and Western-backed protests in Cuba, and possibly, if you can, talk about Venezuela and the ongoing Cold War on Russia.
Sure. So I think one of the most important aspects to focus on is actually taking a look at the NATO Association of Canada as one of the dominant these dominant drivers that takes a lot of money or sponsorship, has a lot of peculiar sponsors or partners, and look, their transparency like blows away basically impact in terms of how opaque they are. with how they operate and how they get their funding. It's quite something. But NATO AC, NATO Association of Canada, right? This thing was started as the Atlantic Council of Canada. And so it was set up by the Canadian government basically to be a propaganda institution for NATO, right? So it began to take like private funding around like the mid-70s or so. It stopped after a few years taking just government money, right? And so just to mention, of course, right, that NATO AC is part of the Atlantic Treaty Alliance, which features the infamous Atlantic Council in the U.S., which has been written about so much, and I mean plays an influential role in policing social media in favor of pushing, of course, imperialist propaganda, far and wide. So this is the thing about it, right? I want to focus on like some of the financials around it first before I get to the broader points, because it's I think it's very important, right?
Yeah, go right ahead.
So some of the patrons, you had basically Dominion, Canadian insurance company. You had Scotiabank. You had two weapons contractors in Boeing and Irving Shipbuilding Inc. You also had Canadian Aviation Electronics, another weapons contractor, and the Indonesian consulate donating money. Then you jump a few years later, right? Then you have they introduced this thing called corporate members. You have like General Dynamics Canada. You have this Momentum Aerospace Group Logistics, the Chaos Group of Canada, some really weird, seemingly NatSec, national security type firm. You have the Chaos. You have SecDev. You even have Macedonia 2025. I couldn't figure out what the hell that is, but it's some sort of foreign government. It's really strange. Then this donation page, it changes to a sponsorship now. And the trend with the NATO Association of Canada, right, is that they repeatedly change what their fundraising looks like. They delete this stuff constantly. I only found it through Web Archive. By 2018, like 2019, you have like mining companies like Berkadia, Onex. You have banks like TD Bank, BMO. You have weapons contractors and imperialist kind of companies like S&C Laval.
Quite a tangled web of propaganda and deceitfulness. Yeah.
Oh no, for sure. I mean, you have Irving Shipbuilding, of course, which has you have it's just you have such a tier of really like corporate and military industrial complex alliance to essentially fund these kind of institutions, quite frankly. And so the reason why I mentioned this is then that its goal is supposedly, I kid you not, claims to educate and engage Canadians about NATO and NATO's supposed goal of quote unquote peace, security, and prosperity. So this really focuses on like dozens of propaganda pieces on international affairs. It does a lot of those pieces. And its most dangerous one actually is it actively works in campaigns to propagandize Canadian youth into believing that NATO militarism and political interference within sovereign nations is in fact a broader campaign for peace and justice. It really is just such a joke. It really is.
Yes, and with a population which unfortunately thinks that Canada is a force for good in the world and lionizes people like Lester Pearson, it means that that kind of propaganda coming from all of these different networks and all of these sort of semi NGOs and government front groups are all, I think, doing a very good job of hoodwinking people, particularly left-leaning people, to supporting these imperialism, even and different forms of imperialism, right?
Yeah, no, for sure, they're doing a terrific job. I'll even mention something in 2007. Actually, this is one of the most revealing ever. Because I looked through almost all of their links and past sites. in 2007, they admit that their partners included at the time Bulgarian and Czech ministries of foreign affairs. You had the EU Commission's Education Directorate. Then you had the Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You had the Polish Ministry of Defense, Poland's National Security Bureau, and the Slovenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So you have multiple foreign governments openly partnering with the at this time, right? At this time, it was the Atlantic Council of Canada, and it was in 2015 that they became NATO Association of Canada. So important clarification: it's the same organization, just a different name. You have like at least 4 or 5 NATO divisions. You have the rather infamous International Crisis Group. It's really off the walls. I mean, then you have like the Canadian Forces College. You have a Canadian think tank. You have CEDA, the Department of National Defense, and Foreign Affairs Canada, all partnered with this organization. It's like an incestuous mix of the Canadian imperial state, corporate states, foreign governmental backers or supporters, and wealthy corporations and military-industrial complex companies.
And some of them fund Canada's equivalent of the New York Times and the Guardian, the Globe and Mail, right?
Wait. Which company or which group are you exactly referring to?
Well, in your article, you talked about about some of these bodies who donate to the Globe and Mail, or
no. The clarification. I think I need to make a clarification there. So now we're jumping back to the modern sponsors and partners page. I mentioned this 2007 Web Archive page, which I'm going to send to you, and then you can actually throw this Web Archive directly in the chat. Any tips one tip to aspiring journalists or investigative journalists that, hey, maybe you want to work with the Canada-Files or maybe want to do stuff on other countries? Use Web Archive a ton. You will find stuff that these imperialist institutions think are long gone. They're not. And so the reason why I mentioned the sponsors and partners page is because even to the modern day, it's a little wild. Of course, you have NATO, you have the Latvian Ministry of Defense, and you want to know who the Latvian Ministry of Defense is also a definitive sponsor of? Their sponsor of, for sure, is the Macdonald-Laurier Institute of Canada. You have Latvia in NATO 15. You have the Globe and Mail. By the way, I want to mention the Globe and Mail is a sponsor or a partner of the NATO Association of Canada. In Magazine, you have supposedly progressive Now Toronto as one of the sponsors or partners. Then, of course, you have Lockheed Martin, Royal Canadian Military Institute, Canadian Forces College Foundation, and this weird foundation called the Bitove Foundation. And NATO AC even brags to the president that they have, quote, strong ties with the government of Canada, including Global Affairs Canada and the Department of National Defense. So they're just out in the open about it. Now, they won't tell people. They won't tell people the amount of money that was given or anything of that sort. They're very, very much lacking transparency, quite frankly. And when I tried to reach out for clarification by email, this is the first time I ever got this. The NATO Association of Canada, a couple hours after, blocked the email and blocked my email address.
Wow.
So this block, it technically claimed that the inbox was full, but this was sent about like 5 or 6 hours, about at least like 3 or 4 hours after I sent this email.
Unbelievable.
So it's transparent.
Right.
It's transparent BS. If your email inbox is full, you get that right away. It doesn't just magically become full later on unless you block the email intentionally. So that's the level of transparency. These people repeatedly delete their old pages. They don't keep up this old stuff. I found half of this stuff basically by looking through the Web Archive, where I found a couple of their old annual reports. it's I mean, it's just kind of wild. It really is wild that they're so openly hide. They're so like buccaneering and hiding this stuff, and just so arrogant in the way that they handle themselves and handle things. I mean, I was even looking at NATO Association of Canada's 2019 report, and they actually, when they moved locations to a new location in downtown Toronto, they had a section in that annual report openly mocking the anti-war protesters that protested their headquarters. Like, that's how arrogant these people are.
And when was that? When was that?
2019, the 2019 annual report.
Wow.
They openly mock. They openly mock this anti-war movement. They openly mock these things. You want to know why? Because they've been able to act with impunity because there hasn't been serious investigative journalism on an institutional level. And that's where the Canada comes in.
And that's a perfect segue. I was just putting in the chat box the link to where people can donate to the Canada Files to help you with this fundraising drive, and of course the link again to the article we've been discussing. So let's pause for a moment before I get to my last two questions, and let's watch another promo video for why people should be donating to the Canada Files and donating generously if they can. So one moment. Yep. Okay, good. Everybody can see me. Okay. And here goes.
Here from Montreal, often Arnold August here from Montreal, often journalist. Now on the issue of China, there is this brand of socialism, Uyghurs, Hong Kong, Tibet, Russia, Navalny controversy, the Iranian government, Belarus. Now in the United States, there are many outlets that base themselves on serious investigative journalism. They deal with all of these things and more, going against the mainstream American media as well as the Biden government. Now, in Canada, only the Canada Files, actually, aside from those that are connected to a political party or organization, only Canada Files, as an independent outlet, has dealt and is dealing with all of those issues that I just mentioned, based on very serious documented evidence in order to undo all of the mainstream media and the true government talking points. Now there's the issue of Cuba. Very interesting. The Canada Files was the only outlet that supported the recently held July 26 webinar on Cuba, organized by the Geopolitical Economy Research Group. Now, well, I started to scan through the other so-called alternative media, and the answer was there. Some of them don't even talk about Cuba, while others present the usual both sides, sort of a centrist position. But underneath that both sides, they actually give credibility to the mainstream Canadian media and the true government talking points on the issue of Cuba. So one other reason for people to fully support the Canada Files. We need Canada Files in Canada. Thank you.
My name is Jesus Rodriguez Espino.
Yes, couldn't have said it better myself. One moment. Okay, yeah, we're back to okay. Couldn't have said it better myself. That was Arnold August, who has contributed to the Canada Files, both in print and also on the podcast. And if people do donate generously to the Canada Files, and Aidan reaches his goal, Aidan's going to be doing hopefully more, hopefully weekly interviews once a week, and
yeah, a weekly interview show basically on the most important current affairs impacted by Canadian foreign policy. It's going to take some inspiration, of course, from Pushback, from Aaron Mate's Pushback show. So it's going to be something with good production quality. It's going to look like a very nice product, and hopefully have video clips and a lot of these things in it, because if people back the Canada Files to the level that I think it does deserve, they're going to get good quality for it, and even more quality than that's already being produced. It's look, we're an ambitious outlet, and we want to do really big things. It's a need of support to do that, right? So that's
exactly. And so briefly, if possible, can you talk about briefly, if possible, can you talk about this article you published about how this Western-backed pro-EU activist in Belarus, who's been lauded in Western corporate state press and pseudo-left outlets, about how this person was part of the neo-Nazi brigade in Ukraine, backed also by Canada, the EU, NATO, and the US, etc., installed after the Euromaidan coup?
Sure. I just want to add one more important point about that article is people should be keeping their eye on this thing called the Equality Fund. It's a really problematic corporate feminist, one of these corporate feminist basically organizations. And the reason why I mentioned it being problematic is if you take a look at, and Richard Sanders has done some terrific work on this. I'm going to send you this article again. Because Richard Sanders actually wrote a whole article on how Canada, CETA, funded these two groups, CONAP and Infofam, who played a key role in giving a feminist face to the violent, murderous coup against the government of Aristide. And so now you have this new organization, which you could practically just sounds like CETA just got a semi-NGO body to go cover it. Because I mean, it's the exact same core philosophy that you have with Canada and the imperial state. Obviously, now it's not backed by CETA. I'm not making that accusation, but it really strikes you of a similar kind of function, right? And so this organization takes a ton of funding from wealthy American foundations and the Canadian government. The Equality Fund actually launched in 2019, only thanks to the Canadian government. It got a $300 million contribution from the government of Canada. They describe it as the largest ever single funding commitment for gender equality made by our government. And here's the killer line. A new model for sustainable resourcing of feminist movements. It brings together gender lens investing, government funding, and multi-sector quote-unquote philanthropy strategies to unlock and deliver new capital, of course, for feminist work globally. So that same year, basically March 2019, it gets a nearly $5 million aid contract talking about women's voice and leadership in the Caribbean region. And that's just giving multiple of the groups to most likely these corporate feminist groups that are in these Caribbean countries as well. You can already see this group starting to have the kind of corrosive influence in these countries, quite frankly. Though, of course, it'll be up to further investigations and current events to occur before we see things for sure. Then you have March of this year, actually, Equality Fund gets a joint $15 million grant from the Canadian government and Ford Foundation. Yep. I want to give you one of these quotes. It's from this co-CEO of the Equality Fund and really rams home the neoliberal nature of this fund, right? This is by Jess Tomlin. So this is a major sign of momentum in feminist funding and a major step forward for Equality Fund's vision of emphasis, government, philanthropy, and the private sector breaking down barriers and working together to supposedly support feminist movements all around the world. And I've already explained with Haiti, with CONAP, and Infofam, why that is so incredibly problematic and why this strikes me, quite frankly, as just another arm of Canada's feminist international assistance policy, this quote-unquote feminist foreign policy, this pushing of this liberal identity politics crap. Because identity matters. Yeah. It absolutely matters. But liberal identity politics are full of it.
Yeah, and when we think about Haiti, and we think of how Haiti has been called the Republic of NGOs, And I know from my conversations with Eve and looking at lots of good documentaries on Western imperialism in Haiti, and Canada has been the partner in crime to that with France and the United States, is that all of those NGOs all played a part in undermining Aristide, who was an actual democratic socialist, social democratic leader and part of the liberation theology, part of the imperialist movement of his country, and pushing back against the Western-backed thug, the Duvaliers, and all of those NGOs, and they including the ones you just mentioned, destroyed Haiti and made it more unequal, more non-feminist, and so forth and so forth. And it's mind-boggling to say the least.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the thing about the article and the investigation as a whole, and I mean the NED investigation as well. Is I was fortunate enough to go on Alex Rubinstein and Mila Goryab, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, their new show, and last night. And so one of the things I hammered this point on, and I want to mention it again, is that there's a real threat to Canada's sovereignty as a nation. There's a real threat to that, in my view. It's an incredibly severe danger to let these kind of foreign organizations basically fund, even in one case secretly, through a pass-through organization, more bluntly and openly through the National Endowment for Democracy, which has a hell of a reputation for doing regime change and democracy promotion in any country that goes slightly against the neoliberal agenda. I want to bring up a case, Honduras, Manuel Zelaya. You look at him as elected as a solid neoliberal president. You have mass social movements. They achieve big changes. Government is forced to act in the way they want, even though Zelaya is still a liberal at its very core. He gets pushed out in a vicious, bloody coup. And you have Honduras becoming a failed state because of the West's imperialist aggression, quote-unquote democracy promotion, and a support for effective dictatorships ever since. Dressed up in the pseudo-legitimacy of elections, which Canada rushed to back, of course. And so you look at it, right? With Canada, you take a look at like the Wexit movement, which is incredibly pro-American. Much of them want to secede. You could look at a real legitimate danger where these people own a lot of guns. The left in this country doesn't own guns, seems to be really anti-gun, quite frankly, because I think there's this really strong liberal influence or rad-lib influence still dominant in this left, even though there's many forces working to fight that. So you have a case where a right-wing, extreme right-wing has guns. It's very, very, very much pro-America. So it would have no issue taking money from America and taking money from abroad to promote its separatist cause. You could have them weaponized against the Canadian state if America ever wanted some of our resources, or we ever even took some sort of brave decisions and tried to take an independent foreign policy, and we stopped trying to bootlick America 24/7. Maybe even, gosh forbid, we stopped being like 3 mining companies in a trench coat. Like, if Canada as a country pushed slightly, we could go from big allies to, well, it's time to do a coup. And if we don't stamp out these rotten influences, the rot is just going to get bigger and bigger until the rot overtakes everything. And for goodness sakes, the Canadian Empire, Canadian colonialism, imperialism, it's horrible. It is absolutely horrible. But you want to know one thing I want even less than that? Being a vassal of the damn American Empire. And if we don't deal with this crap early on, and this is part of the reason why it was so important for me to expose this stuff, we're in real, real trouble. And the fact that, quite frankly, like yet again, you see this paranoia pushed about Russian and Chinese influence, and then you have this totally ignored because the Canadian state is so convenient with it. I think, quite frankly, thinks that it would be okay with it. But this is how it goes down. This is how it happens. And you have our security agencies like blathering on about this crap without any evidence about Russia and China's influence. But then it's quite obvious they know what's happening. They know what's happening with the NATO Association of Canada. They know what's happening with Open Society funding these groups. They know what's happening with the NED funding these groups. I mean, for goodness sakes, you just need to do Google searches to find this stuff. It's just a matter of you wanting to find this stuff and being willing to dedicate long enough to searching for it and digging into it. And that's the thing that worries me there. And I think I'm hoping that like organizations and people will really take this up actively as a major concern and something to act on. And I mean, especially for like Americans and Europeans to act on this, like demand that your countries and your semi-NGOs and your institutions stop interfering with our damn politics.
Exactly, because you just mentioned Wexit, and Eve had a very fantastic slamming down of like the whole Wexit Wexit ideology and the Western alienation when he was on the Real News with when he was on the Real News with Nora Loretto, also past guest Dimitri Lascaris was hosting, who's also been a guest. And yeah, he said that nobody wants to call a spade a spade. These people who want like Alberta to be like its own country and whatnot, like they want to be their own country so that they can extract all these tar sands, which would mean game over for the environment. And what you're doing with with the Canada Files exposing Canadian imperialism, we have said many times on this program when we talk about militarism and how it impacts how it exacerbates the climate crisis. You cannot be an environmentalist and support any kind of imperialism, militarism. You cannot even be an eco-socialist and support any kind of imperialism, and that's why it's very important that people not fall into the anti-Russia Putin derangement syndrome, as well as the anti China xenophobia derangement syndrome, and get seduced by the pivot to Asia. So Aidan, before I ask my last three questions, let's watch one more promo for the Canada Files and why people should be donating to the Canada Files, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's do that. One moment.
Espinosa. I'm the editor and founder of. My name is Jesus Rodriguez Espinosa. I'm the editor and founder of Venezuela-based anti-imperialist and Chavista outlet Orinoco Tribune. For many years, Canada needed an uncompromising anti-imperialist news outlet which would do critical investigations of Canadian foreign policy. In the Canada Files came along in 2019. For 20 months, the Canada Files has initiated an amazing work necessary to expose the difference of Canada's social democratic political class to Canadian imperialism and directly reveal the dangerous machinations of global affairs, the Canadian military, think tanks, and the Canadian government in constantly perpetrating grievous attacks on the sovereignty and so-called enemy nations, including Venezuela. The Canada Files anti-imperialist stand and in-depth analysis provide additional elements to improve the work many independent news outlets like Orinoco Tribune do to debunk the racist, Zionist, and imperialist moves coming from the north, but also to expose the incongruencies from the so-called progressive and leftists in the north. The investigation that stands out the most to me, among many others, is the one entitled Bolivian coup government calls for another Canada-backed foreign intervention in its presidential election. It's a very good and very well-documented piece on the Canadian government's involvement in the coup d'etat against Evo Morales in 2019. And also the support to the government, the de facto government of Janine Áñez that came later. The Canada Files has a proven track record of critical investigations, but can only continue to do so and expand further with your financial support. I hope you will step up and be among those that supports the Canada Files. Hit the initial target of 7,500 Canadian dollars per month, and the Canada Files editor-in-chief will launch a weekly interview show on the most important world events impacted by Canada's foreign policy.
Thank you, Jesus. Right on, right on. Cannot have said it better myself. Okay. So Aidan, I just have about I just have two more questions left before we wrap up. Which is, can you talk about this article that you published, where this Western-backed pro-EU activist who's been lionized in the Western corporate state press and in the left-leaning press was part of the I believe was the Azov Battalion, one of the neo-Nazi brigades in Ukraine that took power when Canada, the EU, the U.S. and NATO, installed, a bunch of rival oligarchs and these, neo-Nazis, in the Euromaidan coup.
Yeah, for sure. This one was remarkably interesting. Of course, it really kind of started with, of course, the plane being forced down that was carrying Protasevich, Roman Protasevich, by the way, of course, who was this kind of center of this and the whole recent affairs with Belarus. So that gets pulled down on, I believe it was the May 23rd. And so immediately the government's claiming that, Belarusian government saying that this was made due to a fake bomb threat. So they're already making the allegation. I've seen other people make the allegation as well that it was actually kind of a one intentionally getting Protasevich to be forced into that spot, because this was something that Serge Ruski hit on during one of his pieces on Navalny, where somebody at a certain point, certain opposition figures are more useful when they're like jailed or they're in the arms of the purported enemy nation than they are when they're free. They're more useful as an ideological tool and as like a battering hammer, like a battering ram against that enemy nation. It really strikes me that kind of situation, right? But getting to the point.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So Protasevich, this guy was from the very start, he was really like a local democracy, quote unquote democracy activist. He was like in his youth, even he was an administrator of opposition groups on social media. He was actually he was a member of this nationalist, anti-communist, anti-Lukashenko organization called the Young Front, and this organization organized street activities against Lukashenko. So here's the wild thing, of course. So FOIA research, Freedom of Information Act research, is some good stuff on Protasevich, which certainly helped the writing process along to start. And so they actually found that Protasevich was part of the Maidan coup in Kiev. He was actually, a picture on Facebook showed that he was clad in a fascist flag, the Belarusian People's State flag, as he is taking part in a destruction of a Lenin statue in Ukraine. So this guy's already, like, you can tell from early on, is like an anti-communist. He's a fascist from early on, right? So this Maidan coup, the Western-backed Maidan coup against Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, right? That gets completed in February 2014. So for context, that was like, it started off, and this color revolution started off because of the fact that that Yanukovych was going to reject a Western EU kind of trade deal that was going to implement shock therapy on his own country, and he refused that. He was going to go for Russia and that kind of bloc instead as his main trade partners. And that was then, of course, when basically the West activated their democracy networks, and the fascists were just allowed to run free, and run amok, really, and cause the devastation they did. But it's kind of funny. Other than supporting the democracy organizations, actually, the Canadian embassy in Ukraine is directly complicit in that coup. They were camped at the Canadian embassy for a week during that rebellion, during that uprising coup against Yanukovych. So this Canadian press story straight up says Canada's embassy in Kiev was used as a haven for several days by anti-government protesters, of course, during the Maidan coup. So this is it's a rather wild thing, of course, and I think it's something that it's been addressed nowhere near enough at all. Like, I don't think there's been a proper grasp on the fact that our embassy,
It's-
Canadian embassy in Ukraine,
you
was
know,
used as a
I'm-
base part of the time for a coup.
I'm stunned that this is not a bigger scandal. Well, of course.
Welcome to the Canadian media. Look, this is why the Canada Files is around.
Well, but Europe as well. Because anytime you do bring this up, and it doesn't matter if the source is not from RT or Sputnik News, but if you bring it, but if you show Consortium News, the late Robert Perry and Max Blumenthal, who you've mentioned of the Gray Zone, when he was working at Alternet, exposed how much of the Euromaidan coup were people lionizing Ukrainian nationalists like Stepan Bandera, who was a Nazi collaborator, and so and of course, you're in Canada. You also mentioned Richard Sanders, who exposed how all of these civil society groups from like Estonia, Latvia, Ukraine, and they have all these seemingly benign names like the Ukrainian Congress, Ukrainian National Congress, and so forth. They all lionize Stepan Bandera and all of these. Yes, we have to just call it space. They lionize all of these Nazi collaborators. And when people try to kind of like, minimize it by saying, well, they were under the boot of, the Tsar, later they were under the boot of, the USSR. You know what? It doesn't matter, because they weren't, because they actually participated in the murder of Jews, the murders of Roma people, the murders of Ukrainian Russians and people who and the Russian population of all of those respective countries. Like, this is who Chrystia Freeland and the powers to be are getting their memos from, and of course she herself, her grandfather was an editor of a Nazi of a Nazi newspaper in occupied Ukraine. So.
Yep, it's a story. It's an ongoing case and story. Really, it is. This is the interesting thing, of course. I think a well-known thing is that extremist far-right militias, you got the Aidar, Dnipro, Donbass, and Azov battalions, which played a crucial role in the Maidan coup. They all got integrated into the National Guard of Ukraine, which is led by the Ministry of Internal Affairs, right? So then you have University of Ottawa, I believe it's lecturer or professor, Ivan Kachnovsky, basically showed Ukrainian media reports. He brought them to light, which showed that Protasevich, first of all, the thought was that Protasevich had served in the press service of the neo-Nazi-led Azov battalion. So first, everyone thought he was a photographer, basically a journalist or photographer on a war correspondent of sorts for them. Then you start to see verified photos showing Protasevich appearing in the Azov battalion's official publication, which was Black Sun, right? So you saw like the post-Maidan fighting really kind of began it was initiated by Ukraine, right? Because Donbass citizens voted en masse, it was like 90+%, to join Russia after the Maidan coup. So just on this element alone,
because that's where most of the Ukrainian population, I call them Ukrainian, but the Ukrainians who speak Russian, Russian might be their first language and so forth, but they are Ukrainian. It's just that, there's just that characteristic.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, this is the big thing, is you'd start with like this alone, right? This alone is enough of an angle where you could have flat out said that Protasevich acted as an agent of the Ministry of the Ukrainian government during his time serving with Azov. But there's more, because it was later exposed by Dean O'Brien, who's a freelance photographer, actually in Donbass. And so there's video showing Azov battalion. He was part of the Azov battalion as a soldier. So Protasevich he isn't just a journalist. This guy is a neo-Nazi soldier for a neo-Nazi battalion, which is backed by the Canadian government. It's a really wild thing. And of course, you have consistent patterns of support from the Canadian state and local areas. Basically, there's this Canadian Congress Toronto Ukrainian Festival, which got a $100,000 Canadian government handout, got allowed Right Sector Canada, which is Canadian support arm of Right Sector. By the way, that's made up mostly of Azov people. They got to raise money to buy military equipment for Right Sector fighters in Ukraine. So indirectly, they're supporting Azov. Then you have
at these festivals, they all have their posters lionizing their national hero Stepan Bandera and all these other Nazi collaborators, Nazis, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, there's actually even more to it if you give me a quick second, because there was actually two conservative MPs in 2015 actually attended a fundraising event to help these these Ukrainian Nazis and sort actually get weapons and such. So you have like even the Canadian state MPs and such basically formally by their presence, even though they claimed, of course, farcical and really laughable ignorance, they full well knew what they were doing. So you have this case in 2015, right? And then you have pretty soon after, you have Operation Unifier, right?
Yeah.
Operation Unifier begins, and that's when the Canadian Armed Forces began to supply Ukrainian military and paramilitary police units with training and weapons. You want to know who's part of Ukraine's National Guard? Azov Battalion. Azov Battalion is part of that. And they also train basically police, they train, they help purportedly support police reform as well, and also provide training to their counterparts. And there's a chance Azov gets considered part of that as well. So there's a whole other level of connection, right? And this basically really kind of began, of course, in like September 2015. Protasevich doesn't get confirmed to being back to Belarus by until May 22nd, 2016. So he could have been in close contact and received training repeatedly because he's part of Azov as a soldier from the Canadian Armed Forces for up to 8 months, training with our armed forces, directly training a neo-Nazi, a part of Azov Battalion for 8 months. That's where our tax money is going. That's where Canadian money is going.
Wow.
It's a joke. It really is a joke.
It's unbelievable. And wow, it's just sorry, this is blows my mind. Thanks for that. Now, Aidan, well, I think I'm going to try to wrap up. But one of my last questions I wanted to ask then is what's the latest going on with Canada's involvement in the new Cold War on China? And if it's possible, can you update us on the resistance to extradite Meng Wanzhou of Huawei? You mentioned that from the start of the show, and do you think the sentencing of the spy from Canada, one of the Michaels, as well as the sentencing of this convicted drug smuggler who his charge is the death penalty is going to be that in China? By the way, I do not endorse the death penalty or drug laws in China. and these various organizations you've exposed, are they also stupid question, you've already explained it, but I'll just ask it again. And these various organizations that you've exposed, are they also peddling the disinformation on Uyghur genocide? And are they supporting reactionary Uyghurs? Are they supporting reactionary Uyghur separatist movements, mainly expats, the expats groups as well as those from Hong Kong.
Right. So I want to make a key point because the Belarus thing deserves a little bit more because I know you need to cut, but let me explain. So Protasevich, after he then comes back to Belarus, obviously, he repeatedly appears with neo-Nazis, of course, his brethren, during like anti-Lukashenko protests in 2017. Of course, he was also part of book burnings. Of course, I think we know what the history of book burnings. They're a very bad thing, and they tend to lead do that are very bad people.
And were they just burning like all sorts of
like socialist books? It was like left-leaning books and these kind of things. Classic
and just like anything that was in like Russian or
you know that kind of sentiment. It's a dangerous, incredibly dangerous thing. But I'll jump through it quickly, right? You then have Protasevich jumping into this imperialist media sphere. He becomes like a fellow for Radio Free Liberty Europe, which is part of the USAGM empire I mentioned earlier, which is funded entirely by the US state. Then he jumps in 2018 to USAID, so Canada's the American equivalent of CEDA. He works for Belarus Euroradio.fm starting in August. Then he joins in 2019. He becomes the editor-in-chief of Nexta, which is a foreign-funded Telegram messaging channel covering basically Belarusian news. So Nexta ends up playing a key role in organizing pro-coup demonstrations in Belarus, because obviously there's protests against the Western-supported candidate Svitlana Tsyuganskaya. I can't say her name right. Basically, she only won 11% of the vote. There's ludicrous claims claiming that the election was rigged.
Aidan, come on. She won fair and square. Lukashenko.
Yep, 11% is more than 50, right? 11% is more than 50, folks.
And Canada's helping its feminist foreign policy by installing a pro-Western EU back to feminists. What's wrong with you, Aidan?
I don't know. How could anyone ever forgive me? Yeah, but
continue on. Sorry about that.
I know. I'm just playing. No worries. I totally get you there. So of course, it's surprise, it's proven that a ton of these activists are also just directly funded by the NED. So yet another example of why people should be very worried about NED funding in Canada. It's not good, and quite frankly, I think unless it gets addressed, there's going to be more and more groups funded by the NED. And I'm going to have to keep exposing them along with Daniel Z. So point being, right, is that at the end of the day, this eventually later on is used as justification for vicious sanctions, like multi-billion-dollar sanctions on Belarus. Some immediately, like a few days after, and then another wave of crippling sanctions trying to cut Belarus off from the world trade market only a few days ago. So this imperial narrative, these lies about Protasevich being the hero, this is what I mean when, like I mentioned, the point raised by Serge Ruski earlier on about Navalny, is that sometimes these opposition figures are far more useful when they're detained and when they're actually going to face accountability for their actions than when they are out, because then Western state media and I mean, supposedly independent Western media can parrot the line of, oh, freedom-loving, Protasevich, hero, journalist, democracy lover, no Nazis there, definitely no Nazis there, ignore the book burnings, ignore the destruction of the Lenin statues, ignore that. They can push that crap, basically, and then he can be used as, his case can be used as a prime justification for crippling sanctions that, I mean, quite frankly, the U.S. is and Western allies and NATO and Canada have wanted to put on for ages. Because it's interesting that Belarus is one of these countries that was able to retain a lot of its retain a fair bit of the Soviet system, not all of it, obviously, not at the U.S.
Exactly. While the rest of Eastern Europe, including it's all tragic, but the most tragic, arguably one of the most tragic was Yugoslavia. While all of them became, devastated by economic shock therapy and divide and conquer and all of these imperial color revolutions, a bunch of wolves in a sheep's skin. Belarus took an opposite direction and elected Lukashenko and the Belarusian Communist Party.
It's interesting. I think Belarusian Communist Party supports Lukashenko rather than I think him being a part of the party. It's an interesting structure. Like the Belarusian politics, even if you're against the imperial attacks on it, is a complicated thing. But the key thing is that the Communist Party of Belarus does firmly support Lukashenko. Okay. So they are firmly in support of it. It's not a case where they're against him or pro-coup in any sort of measure. So just an important clarification there.
All right, and the reason why I've asked this question before to Jay Watts of the central organizer of the Communist Party of Canada, and to Boyan Stanislavski, the editor of the Barricade and co-host of On the Barricades. I asked them, why should an anti-war, anti-imperialist audience be opposed to what's going on in Belarus? So I think what you laid out is, even if you don't like Lukashenko, it's exactly why, it doesn't matter whether you like Assad, whether you like Libya, whether you like Saddam Hussein, and it doesn't matter whether you like them or not. It doesn't even matter whether you like the democratically elected government of Venezuela, of Maduro or Hugo Chavez or Aristide. Imperialism is wrong, and and the powers to be, these NGOs are trying to overthrow these governments because they don't want to be just a vassal state to the United States, Western Europe, Canada, and so forth, right? I think. Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, yet again, that's why I'll hammer on this point. Why I'm so concerned about NED funding. Why I'm concerned about Open Society kind of secretly doing this funding. I mean, the irony, of course, is Open Society is more open about it. Impact is the organization hiding the stuff. But if you don't look carefully, people aren't going to look through Open Society, right? So you have these organizations acting in very suspicious manners, kind of quietly cloaking this funding. It's just an insanely. Wait, you know what? I can't believe this. I think I actually there's a correction here. It was actually, I'm pretty sure it was Transparency International Canada. It was Transparency International Canada that revealed that it was taking money from Open Society foundations. It actually wasn't Open Society foundations. If you look at it, they only gave funding to Impact. That's what they say. They only gave funding to Impact. So a correction there, and it's something I'm glad we were on for a little longer because it's a really important clarification. It's why I mentioned and why I remember that Transparency International Canada was actually more open about it. They're open about it. It's Impact and Open Society that hide this. And look, I mean, Transparency International Canada is a fairly small organization, right? And so I think they rightfully think that not many people are going to look through this, right? I don't think they bet on the existence of a Canada Files or media figures that are willing to dig into this, investigate this. So that's a key clarification, and I hope people stick around long enough to hear that because it might make things make sense, a little more sense contextually. So.
And you've already answered from the get-go that many of these horror stories that we're hearing about Chinese persecution of the Uyghur population are all coming from the National Endowment of Democracy. The World Uyghur Congress gets their money from the National Endowment for Democracy. George Soros, who you mentioned from the get-go, also wants China to be more capitalist and more of a client state as opposed to an independent state, and so he's also been propping up a lot of anti-China hysteria. But so in wrapping up, then, what's the latest going on with the new Cold War on China? What's going on with Meng Wanzhou? And do you think that the jailing of the two Michaels and this one Canadian who apparently was participating in drug smuggling, and apparently he got the death penalty added to his trial, Yeah. What's going on with Meng Wanzhou, and will the jailing of the Michaels and this other guy, won't that just deteriorate the situation even more, or what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So it's a whole interesting case scenario there. I mean, of course, the Cold War against China, and of course Canada's continued jailing a political prisoner, Meng Wanzhou, and she's a political prisoner at the end of the day, right? Even though the line will be used, she's in like a house or a nice place. Like, you can be in a nice place, but you're still kidnapped.
And she's under house arrest on top of that.
Yeah, that's the thing at the end of the day, right? It's not even like she's just stuck in Canada and she can go around Canada, but she just can't go anywhere else. She's literally on house arrest. Yeah, so you have that still ongoing. Like the final stage around the extradition hearings and stuff have actually been going on for the past couple days. I know they're gonna end in around, I believe it's early September is supposed to be when they are ending. I know there's going to be some sort of events or some stuff like that. Can't say too much now, but there'll be movements acting and taking action around the end of that case is my bet. And so, I mean, there's been a lot of events and stuff in the past couple months calling for Meng Wanzhou's freedom, making it clear why that's a big issue. Obviously, like the July August period is a bit more of a quiet one. We're obviously in the peak of the summer per se, but things are still very active. Actions are probably gonna be taken, and things are gonna move forward there because the resistance is still very strong. I mean, you even have like liberal elites calling for it to basically to be put to not to end that extradition. Because I mean, the Canadian Attorney General has the power to stop that entirely, and Meng should be let go free. So
and if people live in if people live in Toronto, they should join this brilliant anti-imperialist organization called the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. I believe
Hamilton Coalition is in Hamilton.
Okay.
Yeah, Hamilton, people can engage with it for sure. I mean, there's also Toronto Association for Peace and Solidarity is a solid one. But
Canadian Peace
definitely
Congress
engage with the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. They are great. So
yeah, and the Canadian Peace Congress as well. But don't you think though that the jailing of the Michaels, and if this drug smuggler, even if China doesn't put the death penalty on him, but even if they do jail him, won't that only inflame more the new Cold War on the new Cold War on China? Like I'm pretty sure the Canadian elites want China to be jailing the Michaels and possibly kill this drug smuggler because they can use that, they can weaponize that into like China's an authoritarian country, and therefore we're going to be part of the pivot to Asian support more of these Uyghur separatists, Hong Kong separatists, and we're going to punish Meng Wanzhou harshly. What are your thoughts on that?
So I don't know. I think basically I think the Canadian government for sure wants to get the two Michaels back to Canada. Do I think it was kind of politically motivated? I mean, it's one of those cases where based on the activities they've been up to, it's certainly not something where you can say they're a spy for sure. I mean, it's very suspicious kind of stuff. It's very suspicious kind of stuff. So, I mean, hey, it's a difficult situation there, of course. But I think the most important case, of course, one of the most relevant ones, of course, is the Canadian drug smuggler. Let's be real here. This guy smuggled more than 200 kilograms of meth into China. And you look at China's history with Britain like forcing opium into the country, the opium wars. They're still trying to fight off drug gangs in the country.
China has its own organized crime issue with the triads.
Yeah, and so basically, of course, China's going to be very angry about this. And look, am I supportive personally of the death penalty? I don't really think it's the best thing. But
we are not supporters of the drug wars.
yeah. But at the same time, right? You have this like Western white drug smuggler. Basically, you have China's history of traumatic history of this, And so, I mean, look, I'm not gonna go around trying to tell China they can't like put the death penalty for drugs, right? I'm not gonna do that. Am I gonna be the biggest fan of death penalty? I'm not gonna advocate for it. But at the same time, look, it's their country, it's their sovereign decision to make, and if based on the history, the geopolitics, and the trauma that they've gone through as a nation, they choose to do that. I mean, it's their decision to make. So regardless of whether the person's Canadian or not, he's committed crimes, and they're very, very serious crimes.
I'll just say China, don't give him the death penalty. But if he did the crime, okay, you smuggle drugs in China, so well, you're going to be in a Chinese prison. So there. And but Meng Wanzhou, though, if she goes to jail, this Cold War is only going to get more and more.
Well, if she goes to America for the trial, and then look, she's inevitably it's going to be a show trial. I mean, it's already been a whole show trial here. I mean, like for example, the HSBC documents that basically would have pretty much exonerated Meng against those charges that America was trying to push on her, which are illegal but under international law, by the way. This is a whole sham case from the very start. Basically, it's going to be a sham trial, an openly sham trial, basically. So it's an incredibly dangerous thing. If one gets forced to America, then you're going to see vicious ramping up, I think.
Yeah, no, but they're playing. The powers to be are playing a very dangerous game of fire with the jailing of Meng Wanzhou. If she gets extradited to the U.S., heaven forbid if Julian Assange gets extradited to the U.S. But if Meng Wanzhou goes to the U.S., this new Cold War with China is only going to get more and more colder and heaven forbid hot. I mean, how can China even respond to that as apart from just probably cracking down more on these Western front groups in their country, right? Or
yeah, no, for sure. And look, I will say with China is that even if America pushes through the Meng Wanzhou thing and Meng Wanzhou case and manages to get her to America and then prosecutes her on a frequently illegal and farcical charges, I don't think China will viciously lash out or take any terrible decisions. They're striking as very smart diplomatic players. So I think they'll have other more intelligent ways of going at things. I mean, you look at it, interestingly enough, with the 2008 crisis, how China basically acted as a bulwark, protected the international financial system. You're already seeing like China take certain economic and industrial decisions that are basically causing inflation to rise in America. They're not going to be protected from that anymore. So those are the kind of moves that China has every right to take to basically they can stop helping America at all. They can like cut off any amount of American treasury dollars. There's a lot of economic, financial, and diplomatic things it can do to not retaliate in a stupid manner, but make its impact very much felt. So yeah, I think it's one of these key things where the Meng case has to be fought. I mean, another thing eventually that might be worth having someone on the show to talk about is like Alex Saab as another example of that. There's more, obviously. And yeah, certainly I think the best case scenario is the two Michaels are able to come back to Canada and Meng Wanzhou is just allowed to come back to China. I think that's the best case scenario. Look, the drug smuggler Canadian is whether there's a relention and the person goes to jail instead of getting the death penalty or gets the death penalty. Look, he committed a crime and he's going to have to sort of deal with the punishment regardless of what that punishment is. So that's my view at the end of the day. So,
well, let's hope cooler heads prevail, and let's hope that the anti-imperialist movement, which gets stronger and stronger, especially on the issue of China, because unfortunately, too many people are selectively anti-war as opposed to being consistently and sincerely anti-war. And of course, you mentioned, some on the left jumping the shark and recycling a lot of the propaganda on China. The Azija Khan, Kanji woman, or
Wait a second. Sorry, I couldn't hear. The audio cut out for the past few seconds. Could you please say that again?
Oh, I was just saying. I was just saying that, like, I hope that the this is why the anti-imperialist movement needs to step up the game in Canada and elsewhere. And there, luckily, in the U.S. there's now pivots to peace, and I know Danny Haifong and Black Alliance for Peace have been campaigning for détente with China and de-escalating all of this, because unfortunately, a lot of people in the Western left are selectively anti-war as opposed to being consistently anti-war. And of course, you mentioned at the beginning of the show that woman, Azija Khan, and how she's been, also recycling a lot of the propaganda on China, particularly with the Uyghurs.
Yeah, no, for sure. Action definitively needs to be taken, right, by institutions, by movements, and so that's one of the key things with Canada Files. Its work is very much to see the Canada Files, and myself and Danielle see the Canada Files as an element of the broader movements, in the way the fact that movements and media need to work together on these fronts. Look, we're fiercely independent, but at the same time, we are left-wing, we are anti-imperialist, we are socialists. And the journalist is for a purpose. Like, we do the journalism for a purpose, to work for a better world. And we're not going to hide from that. We don't have some liberal ideas of journalism where it's all separate from the world that's there. I mean, that idea is just, quite frankly, exploited to pretend that they're neutral while then doing the exact things that they demonize anyone who has the guts to just call the system for what it is, BS, for doing. They just demonize them so that they can look good, right? It's all about hegemony. And so as a result, that's the key thing, is that with the Canada Files, with the work that's being done, it's very much trying to break out of that liberal and radical liberal hegemony around the Canadian media, doing these critical investigations, expanding the journalism, and look, just being able to do the Canada Files work as a minimum wage job. That's the end goal, really, of this campaign. It's not to make millions or whatever. It's just, look, it's to make enough to do, to be paid for doing what is a full-time job. This stuff is exhaustive work, and it's work I love, right? But at the end of the day, it's work that needs to be supported, because we work fiercely hard to give the movement and people the ammo, the information they need to act in better ways, to help fight the imperial system, fight imperial domination. And I mean, to push and to make sure to push for Canadian sovereignty, so we don't get caught, so that our country doesn't get caught with its pants pulled down if things come to pass.
With the Anglo-American Empire, yeah, and
that's where the Canada Files comes in its role, right? So it's just really a really strong call. If you can support the Canada Files, basically go to the Canada Files, go to the donor box link. I know Yuri has it there, so go to the donor box link, basically. Or even if you want to check the articles first, go check the articles. You'll see a donate link right in the top corner and at the bottom of the article. So anyway, you'll be able to see it. So yeah, I guess Yuri, you have any other questions for me?
I'm going to skip the last question I had now because we've already had I would say arguably we've probably broken a record. This is probably going to be the longest episode I've ever done. So we had 5 people that were viewing, and now now we're just to 2. So I think it's probably probably a good place to wrap up. So I'm going to save my last question for another time and get you back on. So, folks, please donate to the Canada Files. Check out the Canada Files and read read their new articles and even their past ones. And Eve Engler is a contributor to the Canada Files. Arnold August is also a contributor to the Canada Files. And before I wrap up, I do have to say this. I prepared this. A comrade of both me, a comrade of Aidan's, and a person who was on the show 2 months ago, Omar Latif passed away. Omar Latif participated in an epic, at times very heated debates. It was him and Fiona Sim versus Morgana Adby, a journalism student. Used to do some articles for the Canada Files, but due to editorial differences over the Uyghur genocide narrative, she's no longer part of them, and she had a falling out with Aidan, and I participated in the debate about that. And Omar, I think, did a very great job pushing back against this narrative that there's a Uyghur genocide going on. So before we wrap up, I do have to say, rest in peace and power to Omar Latif of the Committee of Progressive Pakistani Canadians and the Communist Party of Canada. And my heart goes out to his family, his friends and colleagues, especially Moxie and Kieran Fatima of Red Life Podcast, and Jay Watts of the Communist Party of Canada. And I also want to express my deepest sorrow again to Margaret Kimberley and the entire team at Black Agenda Report, Black Alliance for Peace, and the Black is Back Coalition for the passing of Glenn Ford. And may both of those gentlemen's revolutionary spirits and anti-imperialist legacy live on in our hearts and our action. Free Julian Assange and all political prisoners of conscience, and end the war on whistleblowers. And I also want to say rest in peace to Joey Jordison, the drummer of Slipknot, and rest in peace to Hank and Boris Kloppers. You may not be here anymore, but you live on in my heart. So we are joined on this edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting, with Aidan Jonah of the Canada Files on our All Things Canada edition. Please, people, donate to the Canada Files, and I'm going to link to a lot of the topics we discussed. And I will also link to again to the donation place. And somebody wrote, "Thank you for both your time." So go Galak. I think I'm saying that. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to everybody else for tuning in. Yoandri Dominguez Garcia, Stephen Lala, also doing fantastic work with Ornico Press, Ghani Abdul, and we're wrapping up. Good night and good luck. Stay healthy, everyone. Keep on fighting. And Aidan, thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank you to you, and thank you to the audience. So
you're welcome, and I'm looking forward to having you back on, hopefully in the future.
Oh, for sure. All right.
Ciao, everyone.
Ciao.